Welcome to the Fed to Fed podcast, where we dive into the dynamic world of government technology. In this podcast series, we'll be joined by current and former federal leaders and industry trailblazers who are at the forefront of innovation. Here, we speak openly and honestly about the challenges and opportunities facing the federal government and the Department of Defense and its partners in the modern age, driving innovation and the incredible capabilities of technology along the way. Whether you're a federal leader, a tech industry professional, or simply fascinated by IT modernization just like us, this podcast is for you. And we're so happy to have you tuning in.
In this compelling episode of GovTech Connect's Fed to Fed podcast, we bring together two leaders at the intersection of public and private sector innovation. Tina Vatanka Murphy, President and CEO of GOVTECH, a leading platform for smarter, more resilient supply chains. And Dave Sloniker, a former federal acquisition leader, now driving digital modernization as the Vice President of Supply Chain at TISTA. Together, they explore how federal healthcare supply chains can shift from fragile to resilient by adopting commercially proven AI-powered automation strategies that improve outcomes for veterans and reduce wasteful government spending.
Tina, Dave, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for inviting us.
Thank you for hosting.
Well, I can't wait to jump into this podcast, and I'd love to start with this question. What is a resilient AI-powered supply chain? And Tina, I'd love to hear your perspective first.
Think of a supply chain as a living ecosystem that enables the flow of goods to be where they need to be to deliver the right patient care at the right time. So what an AI-powered supply chain means, or a resilient supply chain rather, is one that is proactive versus reactive. And here's why that's so important today. Because just in the past year, a hurricane shut down IV fluid production and impacted the healthcare ecosystem for months. There was a port strike that actually paralyzed the movement of goods. And, tariffs are another supply disruption that are throwing global supply chain strategies into chaos. But what we know today is that these are not a series of isolated one-offs. They're a pattern. They're a pattern of a supply chain that is way too fragile, that's not resilient. And what an AI supply chain will do is anticipate that there will be disruption and see around the corner so that we can course correct, ultimately with the goal of not having to impact or delay patient care.
Thank you, Tina, for that perspective. Dave, from your perspective and your background in both government and also military.
Certainly, I think what Tina described is so true and accurate. And as we think about supply chain, AI-powered supply chain, and what does it mean then to define risk? We need to think about the elements of what Tina just described. We know right now we have a global dependency on goods and services across the globe. We talk about China. We know that a lot of our ingredients, our APIs, our active pharmaceutical ingredients, 80% are made in India and China. We also know other events are going on today in the technology space, cybersecurity threats. Here recently, a hospital system was shut down because of hacking. And that threat has happened not just once. It's a pattern. It's something that we should be aware of in the health supply chain, which then drives to some of the topics that Tina just described. How do we get a just-in-time inventory? Our inventories across the board, DoD, VA, and I'm going to assume, based on what Tina said in commercial, we're all reliant on a series and sets of manufacturers. We've run those systems relatively lean over the years. You take a lean supply chain conversation and then you add climate change, natural disasters, hurricanes, tornadoes, the threat that happened in Puerto Rico. These are not isolated one-off events. You can't be saying over and over again, this natural disaster is the first of a kind. No, it's actually a series that's happening today. And then in the world that we're seeing today of regulation, things are changing in the regulatory space. There are new standards coming up, and applying standards, the NIST AI risk management framework, for example, which is being changed. These are things that we have to consider in the space for government as we move to an AI-driven supply chain.
And Tina, your thoughts? I mean, you're working on the commercial side of the house on behalf of GHX and your members. What are they saying? Because they're working both commercially and also with the federal government.
There is a lot of energy around supporting the government about driving a more seamless supply chain. Certainly, we've all seen and we understand the financial impact of how things are done today. If you're a supplier serving the VA, you might have 30 resources where in the commercial sector, you'd have a fraction of a resource. So certainly there's a financial impact. There's a financial impact to taxpayers, but really, there's also an impact on our veterans that aren't getting the care that they deserve. And what we see is that in the VA, and Dave used to lead and inspire one of those teams, like there was just really good people doing hard jobs, and we're not arming them with the right tools. But what they know, and what I believe also, is that fixing the VA is an important lever in bending the cost curve of healthcare in America.
Thank you, Tina. I appreciate that perspective. So, what's required to drive AI transformation? And what you see, Dave, from a government perspective, and Tina from a commercial perspective. Dave, you want to go first?
Sure. Let's start off with on the 4th of this month, there was a congressional research service topic called Regulating AI. And it described what we need to do from a congressional perspective as a nation to move forward with an AI process. OMB just released a paper that said, here's the things that the federal government must look at in terms of regulation. But the point is trying to move toward, it describes the federal governments need to accelerate their use of AI by focusing on innovation, governance, public trust to reduce risk at the agency level and prioritize the use of AI that is safe, secure, and resilient. And so it goes back down to the simple point, we need trusted data. We need to trust the data that we get, and we need to trust the sources that we obtain the data from. And commercial industry with companies like GHX provides that service. And I'll speak very clearly for the VA right now. That trusted data for across the federal government is really what's needed as you drive these ideas of using AI. The data source is first, which needs to be trusted, the ethical procurement of said data, and then how we use that data to make informed decisions. I think that framework right now in the federal government is being formed. There's lots of thought process about it, but the fundamental truth is the fundamental truths. Where do you get your data from to be able to create this conversation?
Great. Tina, your thoughts?
I think that was extremely well said, Dave. And I agree. All of the AI work has to sit on a foundation of accurate, trusted data, or else we're wasting our time. So I definitely agree with Dave. And here's the good news. We're not talking about building rockets. We're talking about retiring fax machines. Because the first step of getting accurate data is just basic automation, right? Just simple automation across VA procurement today. The second thing to think about is about contract compliance. Today, about 68% of the VA's spend is going through purchasing cards. Someone from Doge was talking about this as the blank check, right? So this is 68% of the spend that's going through card. In the commercial sector, it would be less than 2%. And so this is all spend that's not contract compliant. So certainly there's a huge financial implication to the fact that this is not contract compliant spend, but this is healthcare. So there's actually also a patient care implication when we're not confident that we're buying the products that were chosen for care. So number one was basic automation. Number two was driving contract compliance to contracts that the government has signed. And number three, because this is healthcare, is the most important. And that's about driving clinically informed decisions. So way back in the day, we might have been, if we were negotiating prices for a heart valve, we may have just been looking for the best price heart valve. But today, what we understand in a value-based care world, we need the intersection of best clinical outcomes, right? The evidence that tells us that this heart valve has the best outcomes for patient and has the best cost. So that's the third area, making sure we're using trusted data to make clinically informed decisions.
I love it. Dave, your thoughts on that?
I could not have said that better. Historically, and I'll speak for the DoD and VA world that I'm most familiar with, the idea that Tina described has really been in separate stovepipes. We manage the supply chain over here. And from a DoD perspective, I'll start there. We've said, no, not a good idea to connect it to the clinical. We keep these things separate. We keep the idea about what is clinical separate in our systems because we didn't want to mix the systems. Back to technology today, where we started the conversation, the systems wouldn't allow you to aggregate, merge data. It was just too difficult. So we've said, no, we're going to do this here and create value-based contracts for price and not necessarily move that ball closer together. But to where we are right now with the technology of replacing fax machines, the technology is going to allow us to do that conversation much better. The VA has the largest longitudinal healthcare record. Imagine that conversation, taking away the HIPAA, thinking through of that caseload, and then applying the value statement that Tina just described with better procurement methodologies, better clinical outcomes. Let's describe it as, hey, let's look at what the American Medical Association says is the best process and apply the tools, apply the ideas, apply the resources, apply the contracts to achieve those based upon what the AMA says or what American Dermatological Society, naming governing body who says this is the best body of evidence to do that. And we can work that process backwards. Before we would say, nope, can't be done. But today, now, from a fax machine to a different model, we can do that. That all goes back to the fundamental conversation of trusted data. The elements to be able to create these outcomes from a clinically driven process are available today. It takes leaders on both sides of the fence, on industry willing to share, government willing to rethink, and putting it together to create that better outcome for not just the veteran, but for American healthcare. How we deliver the care models of the future is now. It takes the leaders of today to rethink that because we've been dogmatic in our processes because of what the technology was, not the technology could be or is. And that's where we're at this great inflection point, I think, in history to make those types of decisions.
Tina?
You know what Dave said is it's so important. And I want to underscore a couple of points. So I opened with talking about the supply chain as this living ecosystem that enables the flow. And what Dave just talked to, it was incredibly well said. There's exceptional work happening today within the VA in silos. So imagine you're doing the work to make a really good patient-centered decision for a product over here, and it's sitting in a silo and never then informing the procurement of goods or the product that shows up and then the care that's delivered. So what I want to highlight about what Dave said is the VA is sitting on exceptional data. And it is because of that that I believe when we bring together these processes on a single platform, which, by the way, is how it is done in the commercial sector. So you have this great data that VA has, you bring it together in a seamless way, and I have no doubt that VA health system can be the leading health system in this country. And so it's, to just be perfectly candid, it's both inspirational to think about just how great we can be while also being frustrated that we aren't there today.
Well, it's an interesting time now with the new administration in place, and their focus on drivers of efficiency and meaningful outcomes and using emerging technologies. This is a pivotal time to be able to embrace AI, to be able to drive this type of impact on supply chain. Final thoughts, Dave?
Well, the frustration of not doing it is the same thing that drives me today. As I heard you say that, I thought to myself, I'm a veteran, as we described. I've served in the Army for 28 years. I tried to solve some of these problems before, and to be quite frank, the technology wasn't there to do it. As I sit here now, after almost a 30-year career in the federal government, going, we have the opportunity today with the right policies, the right processes, the right systems, people, process, and technology. That takes leadership. And I think, at least from what I've seen and read about, I think the leaders of this current administration are open to those ideas for maybe the first time. So pulling those strings together to be able to say, aligning the right people who desire the right process to achieve that outcome makes me excited for the tomorrow.
Tina?
Yeah, well said. Well said. I agree. And I think there's 2 points I want to make. One, the way this would be done in the commercial sector is assess what the problem is, test solutions, and then execute. So we've been working with the passionate people at the VA for years. They've assessed, they've done their homework, we've tested solutions together, and it's time to execute. Like, we are shovel ready to execute on solutions. And I think it is incredibly important that we stop treating fragility of the supply chain as the cost of doing business. It's not acceptable. We can do better, and we should do better. And Dave's right. The time is now, and the needs have never been greater. We're seeing supply disruption at an all-time high. We're seeing costs rise. We're seeing resource issues. So all of this pain in the supply chain is at this heightened fever pitch. But the good news is that the technology, as Dave said, has caught up with the needs of the day. And so I'm both optimistic, excited, enthusiastic about the prospect of once and for all leaning in and making the VA health system the leading health system in the U.S.
I love it. Well, I want to thank both of you for joining us today. That was such an exciting discussion. We're going to dive deeper at our event on July 14th with the best and the brightest experts from the Department of Veterans Affairs, Defense Logistics Agency, and Military Health to talk more about ways in which they are doing such compelling work to be able to use these different technologies for supply chain. So thank you both so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you, Dave, for the work you do tirelessly to improve care for our veterans. It's incredibly meaningful work.
Thank you for having the conversation. It's meaningful.
This concludes today's episode of the Fed to Fed podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. Your feedback helps us continue bringing you thought-provoking conversations with the brightest minds in government technology. Stay tuned for our next episode, where we will continue to explore opportunities to harness the power of technology and explore what's next in developing a more innovative and efficient government. Until then, this is the Fed to Fed podcast by GovTech Connects. Thank you for joining us.